It's up to you. First of all, nobody's ever lived in a capitalist society. A capitalist society would self-destruct in no time. So in fact, the business world constantly intervenes to make sure that they're not subject to the ravages of the market, which would destroy everything almost immediately. May work in an economic seminar, but it doesn't have to do with the world. So we all live in some kind of state capitalist societies. What's coming next? Well, actually, it's very much it's very contentious right at this moment. We're right in the middle of a pandemic. Sooner or later, we'll get out of it at huge cost, needless cost. We know it's needless because countries that have done something serious have gotten out of it. Vietnam has almost no cases, right on the border of China, poor country. Taiwan, half dozen cases. Cuba, almost no cases. New Zealand, living normally. A lot of things that can be done if they weren't done here, but they could be. But sooner or later, it'll get over. I mean, I was born not long after a much worse pandemic. The flu, the 1920 flu killed maybe 50 million people or so, way more than this. But we got over it, and we'll get over this. But the question is, what will the post-pandemic world be? That's being contested vigorously right now, and you ought to be involved in it because that's going to determine the future. There's the usual sort of class war going on. The forces that created the neoliberal disaster of the last 40 years, which actually has a big role in the fact that the pandemic came. The people who created that are working very hard to ensure that it's reinstituted in a harsher, more cruel form, more surveillance, more controlled, better means of propaganda, indoctrination, structures, and so on. There are other forces around the world trying to create a different world. Well, we don't know who's going to win. You never do. But the struggle's going on right now. And how it comes out will help answer your question. There are actually international institutions trying to get involved. You don't read about it much, but there's a Progressive International recently formed, just had its first international meeting in Iceland, where the prime minister is a member of the directing board. It sort of grew out of the Sanders movement in the United States and a similar movement in Europe. Yanis Varoufakis's DiEM25. It's a transnational European Union that's trying to salvage what makes sense in the European Union and to get rid of the rest. A lot of it's very harmful. It has a lot of global South participants all over the world, and it's trying to bring together forces around the world that will deal with these issues. Many of them are very lively right now. I mean, some of them are really existential problems. I'm sure you know about them. Take, say, vaccines. If the poor countries of the world, Africa, Asia, if they don't get vaccinated pretty quickly, not only is it horrible for them, but it's horrible for us. The virus is mutating. Nobody knows exactly how, but it could very well get very lethal forms. This virus is highly contagious, but not too lethal, statistically speaking. Other coronaviruses like Ebola are highly lethal, but not too contagious. And we don't know that we'll be so lucky next time. Next one around may be highly lethal, highly contagious. And could be mutating right now in Central Africa. So what are the rich countries doing? Monopolizing the vaccines for themselves. Not just take the US. The US happens to have extra vaccines right now because the FDA has not authorized the AstraZeneca vaccine. So we've got a big store of them. So Biden did something about it. He gave them to other countries. To the countries that need them? No. He gave them to Canada, which has a bigger store of excess vaccines than any country in the world, way more than it can ever use, and to Mexico as a bribe so that Mexico would keep people fleeing from the wreckage we created from coming to our country. Very nice. Gave the vaccines away. Well, people like you can be doing something about that. Now, there are countries there are actually internationalist countries. Very few. There's one not very far from us called Cuba. It's the only real internationalist country in the world. So what does the United States do about that? Well, try to strangle them, try to destroy them, and just keep to the vaccine, just the vaccine. Here's something you probably didn't read in the newspaper. The Health and Human Services Department a couple of months ago came out with its report for 2020. It's Azar's department under Trump. Came out with its annual report for 2020, talking about all the wonderful things they did. You read it carefully, there's a couple of very interesting things that they did. One of them was to pressure Panama, poor country, serious virus disease, pressured Panama to refuse the aid of Cuban doctors. And they're very proud of that. They achieved it. We saved the continent from the malign influence of Cuba, which is the one country in the world that's sending out doctors to help people. Got to protect ourselves from that. There was another part. Brazil, you've probably read in the papers, is a total disaster area. The president is a Trump clone. It's caused an utter disaster, short of vaccines, nothing. But the Health and Human Services Department helped take care of that. The American embassy pressured Cuba not to use Russian vaccines, which are the same as Western vaccines. Medical journals tell you that. But we've got to prevent their malign influence, is what it's called, from spreading in the hemisphere. Things like this are going on before your eyes constantly. Actually, not before your eyes, because you have to dig a little to find them, but they're there. And all of these things have to do with what kind of a world is going to come out. So it's not the kind of thing you speculate about, it's the kind of thing you do something about. Remember that there's a constant class war going on. The business classes are dedicated Marxists, values inverted, but they're constantly fighting a bitter class war, never relent. You can read it in the business journals. Like in the 1930s, when I was a kid, the business world was very concerned about the New Deal, didn't like it. And you read in the business press about how, I'm quoting now, we have to fight the everlasting battle for the minds of men and indoctrinate people with the capitalist story so they can repeat it in their sleep. That's been going on for many years, and we see the results. That's why there's no unions. That's why the labor movement has been crushed. A lot of work taking off pretty much since Reagan. Reagan understood very well that if you're going to, or whoever did his thinking for him understood very well that if you're going to impose the neoliberal programs that are advocated by the business world and the economics profession, it's going to be a terrible blow to people, as has proven to be. So you have to eliminate their means of defense, obviously. The means of defense are labor unions. So therefore, the first move of the Reagan administration was to crush the unions, break strikes, using scabs, which was illegal everywhere except South Africa, opened the doors for business to do the same. They know what they're doing. They're fighting a constant, relentless class war. Doesn't stop. Now, that's, of course, not the image. The image is we're what we're called soulful corporations who are dedicated to the benefit of all of you people. We work work day and night to help you and so on and so forth. Just trust us. Yeah, that's right. But they're actually fighting a class war, and you can see it. We see it again right in front of us. Like, here's something else you may or may not have read. I didn't see it in the papers. The Rand Corporation, very super respectable quasi-governmental corporation, very reliable, just tried to do an estimate of how much money was transferred during the neoliberal years, the 40 years, transferred from the lower 90% of the population to the very top. Their estimate is $47 trillion stolen from the working class and the middle class for the very rich, top of fraction of 1%, most of it. Didn't happen by magic, didn't happen by laws of economics, happened by policy, explicit policy. You can trace the policies. In fact, just talk about unions. There's a very close correlation between unionization and democracy. As level of unionization goes up, inequality, so also democracy, inequality goes up as unionization goes down, and conversely. Same is true of the minimum wage. It goes up as unionization goes up. Same actually as democracy, which I said by accident, because as you get concentration of wealth, greater concentration, you get less democracy by almost automatic means. So these are policy decisions made by a very class-conscious business class and their representatives in government, which they pretty much own, working for their own interests, obviously, and the population suffers from it. Well, those are not laws of nature. You can change them, and they are being changed. Sanders' movement was an example. It's worth remembering how extraordinary the Sanders movement was. This is the first time in a century that a political candidate has been able to reach fairly high position, almost won, without any support from the business world, the corporate sector, the media, nowhere. That hasn't happened for over 100 years. In the United States, elections are pretty much bought. You can predict the outcome of an election with very high precision just by looking at campaign spending. Well, this broke a pattern of a century, and it's having effects. Mainly it's due to lots of young people who did the work. So you can answer that question. You're the only person who can answer your question. What do we do to bring about a different world?